Hello and welcome to this Tes Big Debate webinar. I'm your host, Henry Hepburn. Today we're discussing the implications of the Tes Annual Wellbeing Survey 2024. The past year has presented all sorts of challenges for the UK education sector. Schools are dealing with painfully stretched budgets, severe teacher shortages, and the ongoing after effects of COVID, in particular around the attendance of students, all in the midst of a profound cost of living crisis. We are particularly grateful then to the almost 7,000 school staff from across the UK who've taken part in our annual wellbeing survey. Their frank responses, highlighting both the ups and downs of a teaching career in 2024, provide a valuable insight into the profession. To discuss the big issues that have emerged from our new survey, I'm delighted to be joined by Christie Cavallo, Head Teacher at the Southwater Infant Academy, West Sussex, which was School of the Year for Staff Wellbeing at the 2023 Tes School Awards. Joe Facer, Head of the National Professional Qualifications Faculty at the National Institute of Teaching. Poppy Gibson, a teacher, lecturer, author and much in-demand speaker on wellbeing. And Ben Levinson, a Head Teacher and Trust CEO. In 2020, his school, Kensington Primary in Newham, London, won the Mental Health and Wellbeing category at the Tes Awards. It's a great panel, so let's get straight into our first question. Workload is a major concern for most school staff. That's certainly come out of the survey. Christie, if I could come to you first, what would you say are the main causes of this, and what can schools do about it?
I think it's tough in schools right now. I think the average class has changed. I think the range of needs has changed dramatically, probably exaggerated quite a bit since COVID. And I think meeting those needs is a massive ask of teachers. And with that comes extra time planning for different needs, planning for different abilities. It comes lots more parents' meetings. Safeguarding has increased dramatically as well. So there's a lot of admin that goes with that. Preparing parent meetings, ILP, and just thinking about all those individuals and managing all those individuals, it's a really big ask of teachers. And I think that trying to reach that range when you've got such a wide range is really hard. It's really difficult. What can be done about it? I really don't know there's an answer at the moment very easily. I think it's a really tricky one. I think without some changes in the ways that schools are planning their curriculums, the expectations on children, and perhaps adaptations to the way some of those classes are organised and provision, it's very difficult to know how to make a big impact on that and to make things more manageable for teachers and for staff in those classrooms.
And Joe, you've got your current role, obviously, that I explained earlier, but you have worked as a head teacher as well, so you've maybe got a couple of different perspectives on things. What's your take on it?
I mean, I think that the sector moves so fast, doesn't it? So even since I was ahead, it's changed. And my understanding, and Christie can probably say more to this, is that schools are increasingly having to fill gaps left by kind of diminished social services, and the work of schools, particularly schools in some parts of the country serving particular communities, has really changed quite dramatically. And I think that in a context of no funding or capacity seeming to be coming through, there's sort of three things we can do, and two of them are terrible, and one of them requires a lot of money. So like none of this is perfect, but either we need to acknowledge that that this is the status quo, that schools are filling these massive gaps, and therefore how can they possibly be expected to provide the same kind of extraordinary standard of education and serve those social needs, and therefore they should be judged accordingly. I don't think that's a good idea. Or schools should be explicitly told to stop filling those social gaps and just focus on providing an excellent quality of teaching and learning for children, which is a massive risk for schools serving, some pretty vulnerable children. So I think neither of those are good ideas. Ultimately, the system sort of answer to this is that schools, social services need the funding and the direction and the leadership to deal with that, so schools can be freed up. I mean, teaching and learning is incredibly tough and incredibly complex on its own. And so we kind of need the sector to take on the things it should be taking on so that schools can focus on that. But I guess the things that I would say are working when I speak to school leaders are total clarity on where your energy should go. Things like a centralized curriculum, really strong behavior systems, those are helpful, but also, undersold sometimes, school organization. I remember working in a school where I would give up my Saturday to come in to do revision sessions. And I remember I turned up and no children were there because the letters hadn't been sent out. And it's things like that that mean that colleagues sometimes are feeling like they're working and working and working and it's not having impact. So yeah, I think a combination of systems and clarity is what's needed.
On to you, Pop. I mean, you speak to a lot of people about well-being, so you must really be acutely aware of the impact of workload. I mean, what's your take on it all?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I sit in a slightly different perspective because I run 2 degrees in primary education at university level. So I've kind of seen my students coming in, you know, ready to train to be teachers and seeing the impact that it's having as they go out into teaching. And one of the degrees I run is a blended degree for everyone is a teaching assistant or an HLTA or similar. And some of the things they tell me anecdotally, for example, the teacher is absent, so they're covering whole lessons. Sometimes they're covering whole days. And I think part of that workload, one thing we need to do is have better boundaries on people, because a lot of the time I'm seeing my students, my trainees being asked to do things that are not in their job description. So already that workload is too much. And I also think part of the nature of the beast is that the people that are training to be teachers and going into these roles are inherently people that want to help, people that want to give, so are more easily exploited when it comes to workload, people that are perfectionists and people pleasers. And again, these can be both positives and negatives, I think, in education. But when we have people that want to give and want to help the people in their classroom, this is part of the issue. So another thing I think we need to do better is at teacher training level, make those trainees more aware of the workload expectation and really encourage them to think where you can work smarter, where you can work in collaboration with others, you know, rather than everyone producing plans. Where can we share things better? And I'm seeing some of that on social media, but again, I think we need to get better at working together as an education community.
So do you think that there's quite a distance sometimes between obviously people go into teaching with a very idealistic notion of the job and with a sense of altruism and want to sort of, help kids make their way in the world, and then they come up against these hard realities of heavy workload, and is there a huge distance between those, that idealized notion of teaching and the harsh realities that young teachers are facing these days?
I think you only have to watch any film or read any book about teaching. Let's look at Miss Honey. Let's look at the teacher training adverts that are pumped out on our screens. They show those highlights and those good bits. What they don't show is a teacher planning and marking for hours. So sometimes we're not perhaps openly preparing our future trainees, our future teachers for those workload issues.
And Ben, when you look at your staff, how big a problem is workload for them just now, and what are you trying to do about it?
I think it's a fascinating area in that actually I think we've moved a really long way on workload in the last sort of 10 years. I think what we were doing kind of 8-10 years ago that sort of garnered so much interest around the school is fairly commonplace now. There's not many schools that haven't really thoroughly gone through their marking policy and looked at how they're asking teachers to mark, and across a load of other areas. And yet, you look at the Working Life Survey, you look at the TES survey, workload is increasing, if anything. And so I think actually we're maybe framing this in the wrong way. I don't think it's about workload. I think it's about prioritization, because the fact is we're getting rid of these different elements, or we're changing these elements, and then more workloads coming in. The reality is that we've only got so many hours in the day. And what we need to be thinking about actually is where can we have the greatest impact? We know that teachers turning up in classrooms, energized, motivated, excited to teach their classrooms, that's going to make the biggest difference. So as Joe said, teaching a class all day, every day, that's pretty much a full-time job, right? So everything else outside of that has to be stripped out as much as possible. I saw a lovely phrase the other day, the fluff load. So you've got to get rid of the fluff load, and just do the things that really have the greatest impact. Because the thing that will make the greatest impact is teachers who are able to work every day, 5 days, end of the term, end of the year, for many years to come. And so wherever we can, we strip that out. For us, I don't think it is a massive problem. You really have to ask my team, but but they seem very happy. They work very reasonable hours, the sort of 50 plus hours that we see in the surveys. That's not the case because we've stripped out so much of that.
I've not heard the term fluff load before. Is there an official definition of that?
Well, I think anything that isn't going to make a significant impact on the children, and that's the bit, isn't it? If you're, it's what we always say. If you're doing something that's for me, or for anybody external to come and see the fact that you're doing your job, that shouldn't be being done.
And staying with you, Ben, so something that was interesting in our survey, perhaps not all that surprising, is that it seems to be that it's SENCOs who are struggling most with workload. Why do you think this is, and what could improve the situation? For example, could the new MPQ make a difference?
I mean, I'm sure the new MPQ will make some difference, yeah. I do think, and others have touched on this, that we're talking about schools, and I think schools have done a lot. I think some of these issues are systemic, and that's where we need to see some significant movement. And we know, there's no doubt about the pressures on that SEND system at the moment. And so I think that's bringing a huge amount of extra workload, of additional stress. But also, I think there is a real issue, particularly in SEND, around the volume of paperwork. It's fairly simple. And yes, of course, there are really important elements to this in terms of these very vulnerable children, significant amounts of money being put towards that. But a streamlining of those processes and procedures, that paperwork, to allow SENCOs to focus their time where it really needs to go on supporting those vulnerable children, I think that would make some significant differences.
And Poppy, do you pick up on similar issues in your work and what you do?
So the main thing that I've noticed since working in higher education, it's astounding the amount of my adult learners, 18 plus, who are still seeking diagnoses for dyslexia, special educational needs themselves, autism diagnosis at adult level. So already we can see that it's a blessing and a curse that in society, I think we're talking more openly around SEND and around neurodiversity. But the impact this is having is more people are more aware of how we can diagnose people, how we can spot behaviours and symptoms. So as a result, a lot of my adults in the primary school, they were masking, they were just having to get on with it. But now, through greater awareness through our teacher trainees, who can recognize some of these symptoms, are helping, support these in the classroom, raise that awareness. It's kind of making a rod for our own back in a way, but rightly so. We need to be recognizing these things earlier and earlier. One thing that I think we need to do moving forward perhaps is prepare parents and carers better, because I feel that if the SENCO is trying to do all of this within the school, where is the power being given to parents and carers to actually take it into their own hands? And obviously we have amazing parent and carer advocates that do, but I'm not sure enough is being done from the powers that be to help support these vulnerable families.
And Joe, what you've heard there from Poppy and Ben with regards to SEND, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and I really agree with Ben on that kind of the vastness of the statutory responsibility of the role. It's almost terrifying, isn't it? They've kind of got the second most sort of accountability to the head, which feels in some schools, given the remuneration and the time given to the SENCO, doesn't feel quite right. And there's huge complexity in the system, and obviously we know there's not enough specialist places, there's not enough money, and I feel really hopeful and really excited about the kind of new direction of SEND that's signalled in some government publications. I feel like there's a bit of a shift in the way we talk about addressing SEND needs, where the SENCO is going to be the person responsible not just for the pocket of children who have the most complex needs, but actually for the main offer, because we know that if we get a really strong main offer in the classroom, that's going to benefit all pupils, and also free up particular individuals to work with those with the greatest needs, who really can't be touched by that main offer. And that's a tiny percentage of children. And perhaps inevitably, I feel very excited about the new MPQ for SENCOs. I think it's a really exciting move. I think having a professional qualification is the right thing, because it's tailored to the real working lives of SENCOs. It's focused on practice and applicability and what you're doing day to day in your role. It's, you know, going to take them out of school less. We all know everyone loves professional development, but nobody wants to miss a day of school, particularly SENCOs with that mountain of paperwork. And you know, we're thinking about designing the program. We're thinking about things like, how do you run an annual review? Let's watch one. Let's plan an annual review. Now you can take it into school, and the next time you do an annual review, you can use that planning and you can make it really good. So we're thinking about ways that MPQ can really support SENCOs to use that practice in the next day, the next week. And I would just say as well, you know, really privileging the voice of practice. You know, we will be staffing the MPQ with serving expert SENCOs. So people, of course, they're going to be exposed to the research. We think the research is really important and glorious and wonderful. But what aspiring SENCOs need is also to be shown by someone who does the job every single day. What does that look like? What does great look like? What can I learn from you as you do that job? And those serving practitioners are also so well placed to help participants then, you know, grapple with the challenges, because they too are meeting the same challenges in their own settings.
And Christie, you obviously work with some of our youngest pupils, our youngest children. Do you find similar issues in your sector?
Yeah, there's an awful lot that's been said that resonates with me. I think that qualification is going to be really interesting to see. I think that some of the gripes I've heard from SENCOs historically about training they've done is that it wasn't really relevant to their role. It wasn't useful to their role. It felt like a tick box exercise. I've got to get this award, but actually there's nothing really I've done in it that helped me. And I still don't know how to do this or to fill this form or to make that referral or where to get help. So the idea is going to be useful. It will provide them with the skills, the resources to actually be able to do their job day to day is going to be hugely beneficial to those SENCOs. And I think what Ben was saying, consistency, that consistent approach is really important. We've got so many different systems going on across different local authorities, across different schools and different trusts. To have some consistent approaches and streamlining some of that is going to reduce the discrepancy that you get from different areas, and also that overloading of work and administration for SENCOs. And I think it comes back again, as I said earlier, and as Joe was saying, the needs in school, it's really tricky to manage, and a lot of that falls on SENCOs, and a lot of SENCOs in schools also hold a DSL role, so that safeguarding goes alongside that, and it's a very responsible job. It's a massive job, and it's probably one that isn't given the value or the recognition really that it deserves.
Moving on, what we thought was really important to stress is there were a lot of positives that came out of the report, lots of issues and problems and challenges, of course, but as one example, the overall confidence in teachers' own abilities and their trust in school leadership seemed to be on the up year on year. What I wanted to ask you all is this just a case of things sort of returning to pre-COVID norms, or are there more reasons than that to celebrate? If I could turn to you again, Christie.
Yeah, I think it's not just coming out of COVID. I think COVID was an interesting time. I think what it did was it sort of brought a lot of schools together as regards leadership and staff, and there was a very much a collective feeling of getting through that, which has helped and definitely has built a few bridges where perhaps there hadn't been some beforehand. But I think it's more than that. I think that with the challenges schools are facing, schools are trying so hard to put systems in place to support their staff, to have conversations, open discussions. What can we do? What can we do better? How can we help? And I think that a lot of teachers recognise that, and they've got confidence in that leadership. I think the frustration is further up. I think it's with policymakers, it's with governors, with government rather. But I think that the school leadership working with staff, with teachers, with teaching assistants, learning support assistants, that relationship is really good. And I think that they do feel valued, they do feel listened to, and I think that's us working so hard to say that we do recognise, we value you, we value the job you're doing.
And how about you, Joe? Is it more than just that we're coming out of the COVID years finally, or is there something else going on beyond that explains a rise in confidence in teachers' own abilities, a rise in the levels of trust in school leadership?
I think the one thing we can say about schools is that they are hugely responsive. and flexible, and that schools move on really, really fast and are really responsive in that way. And you know, when I spend a lot of my days talking to school leaders, and they are so keen to work with stakeholders, and they are so keen to listen and adapt. And probably because teachers are just the best people, right? That they're humble and they always want to get better. And you know, there's so much great practice in trusts where they're working proactively to address teachers' concerns over workload and pupil behaviour and the SEND issues that we've kind of discussed, and particularly around, you know, we know that I think that the communication between schools and communities has been quite strained in recent years, and schools again are being so proactive to try and address that and learn how to better work with their communities in a way that looks really different now to how it probably looked 10 years ago. I would say, from my experience and talking to other colleagues, I do think things like training and development of teachers did take a bit of a backseat during the COVID years, because we kind of just had to keep the school open and keep a member of staff in a classroom was the priority. And you know, obviously the things about schools that are so joyful, like plays and concerts and celebrations, again, weren't prioritized, and rightly so, because there was a big job to do, but I think that had a knock-on impact on the morale of pupils and teachers and parents, feeling like, you know, what is school if not a place of joy? And I feel like seeing that come back and seeing the experiences that children are getting in schools again, and that sense of joy and a school as a place of community is something that is really to be celebrated and sustained.
And Poppy, when it comes to well-being, I'm guessing that crucial to a sense of well-being within a teacher is that relationship with the school leaders, and if that's positive, then that is going to massively feed into a good sense of well-being. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, definitely, of course. And I was so pleased to see through the report that the confidence is up. And I think you're right. It's definitely due to that better communication. And totally agreeing with everything Joe and Christie have said already around what schools are doing. But I've also seen a push in what we're doing at higher education level when those trainee teachers are still in that training period to also, and I think maybe this also feeds into why that communication with leaders is better, because we're trying to show them leadership is not just for the leaders. Like, you can be leaders, you are leaders. So we're really encouraging our trainee teachers to be researchers, to think how they can do action research, to think how they'll go on to do a master's or a doctorate in education, even though when they're sat there on their undergrad degree, they cannot believe they will ever do those things. But we're trying to get them to recognize you are powerful, you are worthy. And I think I'm seeing again, a lot of us at higher education level are building in things like wellbeing and mindfulness modules into and alongside the primary curriculum content, so that we're trying to remind teachers that you are worthy, you are valuable, you should be confident, because you're going through a rigorous training process to become a teacher. Not just anyone can be a teacher. So I think all of these things, combined with everything Joe and Christie said about the great things that some schools are doing to really build teachers up and ultimately, yes, for teachers and leaders to be working in partnership and sharing the leadership, is all part of what is having that increase in confidence.
And Ben, as a school leader yourself, you must be happy to see this what seems to be a rising level of trust in school leadership. And can you see any particular reasons for that?
I think as others have talked about, there's been a real significant investment and increased understanding around professional development, but you know, just in terms of learning, of pedagogy, you know, the amount of research that we have now compared to 5-10 years ago is transformative, and fantastic work being done by people like the National Institute, by the Teacher Development Trust and others, around really embedding this understanding of what makes for highly effective professional development, because I think that's where confidence comes from. It's built on rock, it's not built on sand. You know, we could all fake it till we make it, right? But actually, real confidence comes from having a deep understanding of what you're doing and how you go about doing that. And so I think that improved professional development has made a significant difference. I think in terms of COVID, It probably wasn't the watershed that many people predicted at the time, but definitely it was a time of deep reflection, and as others have said, really thinking about how we go about what we do, why we do what we do. And so I think from a leadership perspective, there is a real improved sense of what that leadership looks like. And that's been a real deficit, I think, in education. You know, people go and train to be teachers, and all of a sudden you're a head teacher. And how did that happen? And what does that actually mean? And what does that look like? And now you're CEOs as well. I mean, goodness, even more so. But slowly we're kind of catching up with that, and we're providing the training, the expertise, the frameworks, the guidance, the networks that allow people to understand what leadership looks like, because ultimately that's what being a head, being a CEO, being a director of education, whatever that might be, it's about leadership as much as it is about the nuts and bolts of education. And I think there's a real improved understanding of that over the last few years.
Now, more worryingly, another issue that emerged was that schools seem to be struggling to compete with the new levels of flexible working that you can find in other sectors. How much of a concern is this for you, Ben? And then what would you say can be done about it?
Recruitment and retention is a massive concern, isn't it? I think, and that plays through in all sorts of ways. I know the Working Lives survey highlighted that, both around workload and around pay, and it comes through in the TES survey. We can't, right? That's the bottom line. We can't compete with other industries in terms of that flexibility. If somebody is able to work 2-3 days a week from home, that's just not feasible in education. And so I think it's great. There's been some great work done in that flexible working space, and we can definitely put in place a bit more flexibility. We're really flexible in terms of, we don't mind when people come in, we don't mind when people go home. It's up to them. Some people prefer coming early, leaving early, others coming late, leaving late, others coming late, leaving early, and doing some of their work at home. Fine, whatever. And we can do things like that, but it's tinkering around the edges. I really think actually it's about focusing on the things that we can do. I was really pleased to see the increases around teacher agency in your report. And I think that's so important, that the freedom to be able to do is the creativity to be able to make those decisions for your children and your classrooms, the ability to make those choices, the joy. Joe's talked about the joy of schools and of education, and that is a mixed picture in the report, right? It's not all good, but that is a wonderful thing. And that, for me, being able to go in, spend time with those children, go to those performances, have those wonderful experiences is so much better than being sat behind my laptop at home for a couple of days a week and not having to do the commute. And I think those are the things we really need to focus on.
And Poppy, you were talking earlier about teachers at the very outset of their careers, and when they sometimes come up against the hard realities of work in the profession. Do you see them, even at that age, having their heads turned by other careers that might be able to offer that flexibility and different working conditions?
Definitely. And I think particularly we have career changers who come into teaching where they've worked in other careers where they could book annual leave, they could have their birthday off. And then they're coming into, it's a very complex dynamic where they're perhaps running a class assembly and they're hoping all the parents will come. But when their own child, for those teachers that are parents and carers themselves, their own child has an assembly, they can't go because they're teaching. I think, it's a very tricky situation. I totally agree with what Ben's saying. And I loved hearing how some schools are really being so flexible. And my opinion would be, it all comes down to communication, because yes, it's not really realistic that teachers can have days off whenever they need. And equally, Joe was saying, even for CPD, we feel we can't book days off. And there is a lot of guilt there for teachers. But if we're communicating and I've had trainee teachers in such toxic environments, they've told me the school gate closes at 7:30 a.m. So they have to be on a school site for 7:30, or I've seen, you know, people not being able to leave before 6 p.m. because of this environment. And I think it's when we start penning teachers in with that, then they don't even have flexibility outside of the classroom hours. And this is where we have issues with teachers just needing to leave because it is too much. But if we have schools that are trusting teachers to do your work, to be there to teach, then your own time should be your own time. And honestly, the biggest problem I come up with wellbeing is teachers who are getting home on a Friday night, working all evening, working all weekend, and back in the classroom, and it is just not sustainable. And this is why we're seeing absolute high levels of burnout for teachers that are just not having any life outside of teaching.
And Joe, I wonder if is there another COVID legacy here in terms of people saw an insight into another world? Wow, I can work from home. I can, you know, do things a bit differently. And now they've had to go back to how things were prior to the pandemic. Has that affected the perception of the job at all?
Yeah, and you know, it was interesting hearing from Poppy about teachers at the start of their profession, because I think there's a real shift, there's a real generational shift. Like my generation, we grew up with like the myth of the grafter. If you look at TV shows like The West Wing and Grey's Anatomy, people working these hugely long hours are lionized and celebrated. And you know, when I was attracted to the teaching profession, the message was you were going to work crazy hours and make a real difference to children. And we were like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do, because that was what was celebrated at that time. And there are still people out there working crazy hours and grafting, but they're bankers and lawyers and consultants, and they're earning crazy sums of money. And so definitely, I think that the pandemic has absolutely, and probably rightly so, made people question the amount of time they spend at work and the rewards that it brings them, and that it's okay to be a bit more reflective about what's important to us in life and what we value. I would also add, you know, it probably can't be ignored that there's a massive exodus of women in their early to mid 30s from the profession. I think the Maternity Teacher Project shared some really startling statistics that these women are making up a quarter of the workforce, and they're the largest group of leavers. And so there's a huge sort of need for schools to find the flexibility that, and I totally hear it. And again, I speak to frontline head teachers all the time, and they say, but what can I do? Because we've got the timetable, these children need a consistent person in front of them. And I hear that, and I agree with that. But the experience of the child having their consistent maths teacher 5 days a week, it has to be set against the child who has a different maths teacher every year. So they might get them 5 days a week for a year or two. But what's the impact of sometimes having that audacious approach to flexibility? And it's been so exciting seeing the kind of initiatives coming out of like Dixon's looking at rolling out a 9-day working fortnight. I mean, how exciting is that? There are schools allowing teachers to serve PPA from home. There are schools that retained online parents' evenings so that you know, people could go home and not have to sort of be driving home at 8 o'clock at night, for example. It makes a real difference. And I do think there's something around seeing teachers and leaders as a long-term investment. You know, I worked in one school where there was a vice principal who worked 2 days a week, and before I started the school I thought, that's a bit mad, isn't it? And then I worked sort of alongside her, and I was just stunned by what she was able to do on 2 days a week and the contribution she made to that school, and the wisdom of the head teacher in allowing her to do that, seeing this amazing woman as a long-term member of the school who had given so much but needed to only work those 2 days a week for a short period of time to retain her in the school and in the profession. It really changed my thinking on flexible working and made me see that we could maybe be braver on that.
And from your perspective, Christie, you must see some of these frustrations emerge. What can you do as a school leader, and indeed maybe what have you done already?
I think increasingly we, like other schools, have, as Joe was saying, it's been a bit of a generational shift. We've started to listen. We've looked, coming out of that pandemic. Ben quite rightly said we can't be as flexible as other areas. It's just not possible. And teachers need to be in classrooms, but that doesn't mean they need to be in for a set number of hours every single day. So it's looking at your team, it's looking at the people you've got working on the ground, the people you've got applying for jobs, listening to people. As Joe said, if you've got a great teacher and your great teacher goes off on maternity leave and wants to come back a couple of days a week, I would take a great teacher for 2 days rather than give up that great teacher. And it's looking at the potential of that person. That great teacher could end up being a great leader. They're going to give a huge amount to your school. And sometimes in those circumstances where you're taking people on for just a few days a week, they bring so much more to the table. They bring some energy because they're not in every single day. They can bring fresh thoughts in. And then you have the advantage of 2 teachers maybe in that class over the period of a week, and being able to work together, bounce ideas off each other, and you can get more for the children and for your school as a result. Obviously, there are financial implications to that, and it's about getting that balance right. You don't want to have 2 teachers who work in very different ways, which would be difficult for a child, but that's about a leader knowing their team and knowing their staff and making sure you're matching these people well so that when you're putting teachers together as a job share, it's successful, they're communicating well, and the children are benefiting hugely from having those people there. It's offering up those flexibilities to teachers. If you need to take your PPA at home, take your PPA at home. We offer our teachers, if a child has a sports day or the Christmas performance or an assembly, they can take that time off and they can go and visit their child and they can see their child taking part in that school, because we don't feel our staff should be disadvantaged. We offer that to our teachers, our TAs, our learning support assistants. They can have that time out of the class and we will cover that. And we've introduced recently a learning day during the year, which every staff is entitled to. They can book a day of their choice and they can spend that day doing something that they feel will develop them or improve things or just make their well-being better in whatever way, shape or form they choose. And that's been received really well, and it's just given people a chance to take time out, reflect, not in school holidays, a different time of the year. And people have been really positive about that. So it's just listening, it's thinking, and it's not having a one size fits all. We don't all have to be there in the morning till this time at night. It's about what works for that person. And I firmly believe and trust in my staff. And as a leader, that's important you can do that. They will get the job done. They will get the job done. And they shouldn't need me checking that clock as they come in, checking that clock as they leave, making sure they've done this, making sure they've marked their books. They will do it because teachers want to do the job and they can be trusted to do it really well.
And we're going to end on a positive, albeit a qualified positive, but the survey showed increasing numbers of school staff reporting positive relationships with students and a sense of pride in their schools. Albeit low numbers would actually recommend a vacancy at the school or even working in the sector at all. So we all know that in the right conditions, teaching is a great job, one of the best jobs. And there's clearly still a lot of positivity about the profession at close quarters. But how can we replicate that on a grander scale? If I can come to you, Christie, first.
Of course, yeah. I think the media's got a lot to answer for here. I think there's a lot of teacher bashing that takes place. There's a lot of negativity. And I think they're very quick to pick on small stories of parents complaining about something that a school's done on their child or something that's happened here or something that's happened there. And I think that negative image of teachers of schools is not helpful. I think in schools themselves as establishments, it is very positive. Teachers do feel very proud. They're really pleased about what they do. And I would say even communities are very proud of their schools and the place that they serve in the local community. But the picture wider, social media and media itself isn't always very helpful. And sometimes coming from government, those messages aren't very helpful. It's not a battle between different people. It's not a battle between different organisations. We're all in this together. We want the best for children at the end of the day. And can we work together to make that happen? And for external agencies to recognise that actually schools are doing a really good job here, a really good job.
And same question to you, Joe. There's clearly, it's such a rewarding profession and still is, despite all the challenges it faces. But how can we, project that on a larger scale and really have that positivity on a grander scale?
Yeah, and look, teaching is obviously one of the most fulfilling, energizing careers there is. Where at its best, there is nothing like it. I think that it's probably not at its best right now, but because of the many, many pressures that we've all discussed in this group. I think that there's an opportunity to sort of dramatically alter roles and responsibilities, to address some of those challenges and to rethink a way of running of our schools in a more sustainable way for both teachers and leaders. We talked about teacher workload for a really long time, but actually, what about those head teachers? What about those senior leaders who have been taking on quite a lot of that strain and are now thinking, is it worth it? And when resources are scarce and people are stretched, it's really hard to treat each other kindly. And so I think that, you know, if people are coming to work and they are being treated kindly by their colleagues and they're being treated kindly by the pupils, that makes such a difference. So setting up the systems and structures that support staff in schools to have a bit of time and space to be able to treat each other kindly. Like if I think about the schools that I've worked in, that I've been the happiest at, that I regret leaving the most, I think about the strong systems they had, the fact that there was support there, that the children that I was teaching were so lovely to me. And when they weren't lovely, senior staff really supported me and made me not feel like it was my fault, but made me feel like, do you know what, it's not acceptable. And we've got a long-term plan, because some children are harder to reach than others. And we're working together on this. And eventually all the children will be lovely. And in those schools that I loved working the most, we worked really, really hard, but we also felt like we were making a massive difference. And I think that it's the making a difference, isn't it, that comes through? Because if you feel like you're working really hard and it's not working and all you're getting is negativity, what is the point? But if you feel like you're working hard, you're making a difference to children's lives, then and everyone's being nice to you, then what could be more joyful than that?
How about you, Poppy? I mean, clearly there are serious issues facing education just now, but do you think there's sometimes maybe a bit of a skewed picture, that we lose sight of the positives that are in there?
Yeah, totally. And I agree with Christie that part of that is down to what we see on the media and social media. But in my opinion, there is quite a simple way that we can keep working on this. And obviously coming from an academic viewpoint, but I have seen those teachers that seem most fulfilled and most empowered. And for me, teachers needing to be empowered was kind of the golden thread through the report. Teachers need to be feeling empowered and feel proud of that teacher identity. And then as a result, that is going to go out into the communities and the wider picture. So I think what we need is teachers feeling confident to share their voices, teachers feeling that they have ambition and long career standing in this profession as well. Not that they're going to leave after 5 years and it won't matter. We need to see teachers writing articles, writing blogs, and many do, but many don't. Where are we giving teachers opportunity to share, to be part of case studies of books, to give them platforms to have their voice heard? Because ultimately, I think that is what's going to empower them, because teachers are so valuable, so worthy. And right, you've all rightly said, it is the best career in the world. But the best thing we can do for our teachers, in my opinion, is let their voices be heard.
So the final word to you, Ben. How are we going to project a more positive image of teaching and show what's great about the job?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to see the positives coming through, because I do think it is about trust. I think when I was a career changer, and when I first came into the profession, I was really shocked at how these highly trained, highly committed, highly motivated professionals were micromanaged. These levels of accountability at every level of from the sort of classroom door through to the school, through to the kind of policy level of micromanagement and high accountability, rather than just saying, here you go, this is what we want from you, this is the support to do it, now you go and deliver that. And so I think it's great that what seems to be happening, what seems to come through from the report for me, is that is starting to happen in schools. And that's a real positive. But actually, this is about a system issue. There needs to be greater trust within the system. And I think hopefully with a new HMCI, with some new thinking around the direction that we're going in, the sort of the academies program is trundling on fairly slowly, but those academies, certainly some of those bigger academies trusts, are taking advantage of some of those freedoms to really start to bring innovation and start to bring different ways of thinking. Hopefully we can have a real shift within the system. whereby we do trust these amazing professionals who are turning up every day to make a difference for our children. And I think if we could demonstrate that, that level of trust, that level of agency, that level of belief in those teachers, then that would really start to shift the whole dynamic in the system and the whole outlook for education.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thanks for all your valuable contributions today. It's been a really insightful and helpful discussion. To reiterate, there are clear reasons for optimism in this year's Wellbeing Survey, from teachers' growing confidence in their own skills, to their support of one another, to the often remarkable relationships they have with young people in our schools. But it's also a wake-up call, a reminder of more worrying trends, impetus to understand the root causes behind them, and to find solutions. Ultimately, it's about doing everything possible to retain and nurture that most valuable of assets, the many thousands of passionate and dedicated teachers who work throughout the UK.